This is a Cooper Sportswear A-2 bomber jacket. This specifically is their 50 Years of Victory model. Made in 1995 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the ending of the Second World War, specifically VE Day. So 50 years from 1945 to 1995. Now the only difference between this jacket and the actual jackets made by Cooper during the war is literally just the liner. As short-lived as the contract was, the patterns used to make this jacket are the exact same patterns that Cooper used during the war. Again, the only difference is the liner. So on this 50 Years of Victory model, you have a nice tan khaki liner, as to where the vintage A2s have that very famous dark brown to an almost rust-colored liner. Also, there's a really snazzy picture printed on this liner. On the inside, I'll put a picture up right here so you can see it. That's the clearest way you know that it's the 50 Years of Victory model. Anyhow, this is also a Cooper Sportswear jacket, specifically their Indiana Jones jackets, which were built in about 1984 to 1985 to coincide with a tie-in for Temple of Doom. And Cooper says that they used the Temple of Doom patterns to build this jacket, but there are one too many differences for any hardcore indie fan like myself to say that this is 100% screen accurate to Temple. What I think happened was Cooper was given some still images of Temple of Doom and maybe like a section of pattern, and they just kind of guessed the rest from there. The bomber jacket I'm wearing here is an Averex bomber jacket, and before we continue, I'm going to break a lot of eBay sellers' hearts by saying that Averex never has and never will have a contract with the US military to make bomber jackets for Air Force pilots. It's never been a thing. That jacket that you found in the closet that your grandfather says he wore during the war, if it has Averex buttons on it or an Averex tag in it, sorry to tell you, buddy, it's not vintage. It's a really nice reproduction, but it's not real. Averex has never made bomber jackets under US military contract. Never happened. But I'm not here to talk about how Averex is not a real jacket manufacturer for the US military. What I'm here to talk about is something that has been bothering me for a very long time. This does not mean you have this. Not even close. I've been wanting to make this video for ages, but I've never had an Indy Jacket to go along with my A2 bomber. And you know what? This does not make this. Okay? And I'm going to go through the details as to why. Firstly, yes, the A2 bomber jacket and the Indiana Jones jacket do share a lot of similarities. For instance, the storm covers here are pretty much the same. However, this one's a little shorter than this one, and this one has a more square collar here, as to where this one has a more rounded edge. Why did I say collar? I meant edge. Rounded edge here, square edge here. But technically the Raiders has a square edge as well, which makes it a lot more similar to the A2 jackets. The collars are similar, however, with the Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and Crystal Skull jackets, not so much the Raiders jacket, as the Raider is, in my opinion, a heavily modified A2. But the rest of the jackets, which most people in their mind see Indy wearing, has a much longer and far wider lapel than with the A2. Also, you'll notice that it's a lot more round, as to where the A2s have much more narrow collars. Also, the Indy collar sits freely on the jacket, as to where the A2s are held down via snaps. That's just for safety reasons for the pilots. You don't want your collar flapping around while you're trying to pilot an airplane. That's not smart. You do share similarities here in the collar, though, with Indy's snap to keep the wind cover closed, but with the A2, you have a hook system. The hook system is seen here. However, With the Indy Jacket, specifically you see this more on the Last Crusade and Crystal Skull jackets, not so much with Temple or Raiders. Temple and Raiders share very much the similarities of the A-2 in the fact that there is nothing here to hold down the storm flap, but there is a stud here to hold down the storm flap. And again, you see that on these Cooper Indy Jackets, as well as the Last Crusade and Crystal Skull jackets. So in that way, there's also a difference with those. The biggest similarities, and I think the most reasons why people think Indy has an A-2 bomber jacket on, is because of the pockets. Now, pockets do share a lot of similarities. However, this is the biggest thing that nobody seems to realize. While, oh wow, the lighting changed. While Indy's jacket does look like an A-2 and functions the same way, it has hand warmers. So additional pocket space. The actual A-2s, whether it's mainly the vintage ones, so the ones from World War II up until about Korea, don't have hand warmers. They're stitched shut. And that's because the US Air Force believed that pilots who were just kind of walking around with their hands in their pockets like this looked very unbecoming of officers, because the majority of pilots were officers. So that's why you don't have hand warmers in these vintage ones. But you have hand warmers in modern ones now. And I think that is mainly because of the Indiana Jones jacket having hand warmers. And so everybody wanted hand warmers with these A-2 style pockets. The shoulder boards are something else that does not appear on the Indiana Jones jacket, but does appear on the A-2. The shoulder boards are mainly for sliding straps through, keeping them nice and secure to your body, or in most cases, with these corners here on the shoulder, scrawling your insignia with paint. And as you can see, I put a little officers / enlisted overseas cap here as an added bit of flair. But on the Indy jacket, you don't have that because Indy doesn't need that. It's not required. Also, with the sleeves, you have knitted cuffs, both at the end where the wrist would come through, and here on the waist. That is to keep warmth in check for pilots when they're up in the air, because, well, during the Second World War, planes weren't as well insulated as they are now. So pilots would get cold pretty easily. That's why you see with the other most famous bomber jackets, mainly worn by English pilots, they're big, they've got a lot of fur in them, they're huge and puffy, it's so that the pilots stay warm. Having cuffs, having wool knit cuffs on a leather jacket does not work when you are mainly hanging out in the rainforest or in the desert, which is where we see Indy most of the time. So that's why he's got your standard leather jacket cuff and waistline. There is no need for him to have knit. It's uncomfortable. It seals in heat, and that is not something you want for an adventurer. I'm trying to keep this interesting, that's why I'm moving around like a madman. Anyway, the next biggest thing I want to talk about is the back, because there are a lot of differences there too. So, with the back of the A-2, it's a single panel of leather. That's it. There's no action back. You have some stitching here to connect the three panels. So you've got your main back panel, your side panel, and then your front panel. That's it. That's it. That's the only additional stitching that there is. Oh, also, there is these two ventilation holes on the armpit. The Indy Jacket does not have that either. Take this down real quick, because there's a lot to the Indy Jacket bag that needs to be seen. So, here's the back to the Indiana Jones jacket. This is what is commonly referred to in the sewing community as an action back. And the reason that this is because you have three panels. However, as you notice, there's a little bit of runoff here. This is so that you have full range of motion when you're wearing the jacket, so it's more comfortable for Harrison to move around in when, you know, he's punching Nazis in the face. Also, as you notice, there are side cinches here on the side, and that is for comfort, that's for fit. So Harrison can pull those as tight as he wants or as loose as he wants to also change the fit of the jacket. The last thing about the back of the Indiana Jones jacket is these double vented pleats. That is also for full range of motion and comfort. And I think, oh, right. And you have this stitching here. So technically you have two separate panels of leather. You have the top panel, and then you have the bottom panel, and then you have the three side panels bringing the jacket together. And that is my ridiculous rant that really doesn't matter about how an A-2 bomber does not an Indiana Jones jacket make. So weird jump cut because I'm a professional and my camera stopped recording because I went over the time limit, but as I was saying, this rant doesn't really matter because in the end, people are still going to be buying A-2 bomber jackets thinking it's an Indiana Jones jacket. People are still going to sell A-2 bomber jackets saying that they're Indiana Jones jackets. People are going to sell Indiana Jones jackets saying that they're bomber jackets, and everyone is going to try and still sell Averexes saying that they are vintage bomber jackets from whatever war they think it's from. Rant over.